Something has snapped inside Iran, and it did not break slowly. It fractured all at once, across cities, across classes, across generations. What the regime feared most for decades but worked tirelessly to prevent is now unfolding in real time. Millions of people taking to the streets simultaneously, not as isolated groups, not as scattered protests, but as a single, sustained surge of defiance that overwhelms the state's ability to contain it. From the capital outward, from major urban centers to smaller provincial cities, the streets are no longer controlled space. They are contested territory, and for the first time in a generation, the regime is no longer certain it can reclaim them. What makes this moment uniquely dangerous for those in power is not just the size of the crowds, but the psychological unity behind them. These are not protests driven by one policy, one election, or one symbolic grievance. They are fueled by accumulated anger, by years of economic suffocation, political exclusion, and social repression converging into a single realization shared by millions at once. Nothing improves unless the system itself is challenged. When that realization spreads faster than fear, the foundations of authority begin to crack. For decades, the state relied on predictability. Protests would erupt, security forces would respond, communications would be restricted, arrests would follow, and eventually the streets would quiet. The pattern became ritualized, almost procedural. This time, the pattern is broken. Each attempt to suppress demonstrations generates larger crowds the next day. Each show of force is answered not with retreat, but with expansion. The feedback loop that once restored order now accelerates instability. The scale is staggering. Crowds fill major avenues, spill into neighborhoods, block transport corridors, and occupy spaces that were once tightly controlled. Entire districts move together, making it impossible to isolate leadership or decapitate the movement. There is no single headquarters to raid, no central command to dismantle. The movement exists wherever people gather, and it dissolves and reforms with fluidity that security forces struggle to match. This is the regime's deepest nightmare, a protest movement that does not depend on permission, organization, or hierarchy. It thrives on shared emotion rather than instruction. It spreads through presence rather than messaging. When communications are cut, it adapts. When leaders are arrested, others step forward. When streets are sealed, crowds reroute. The system was designed to crush opposition that looks like a structure. It is far less effective against opposition that behaves like a current. Fear has not disappeared, but it has changed form. People are no longer afraid of repression alone. They are afraid of continued stagnation, of economic ruin, of a future with no mobility or dignity. That shift is critical. When fear of tomorrow outweighs fear of punishment today, authoritarian control weakens dramatically. The regime's tools still exist, but their psychological leverage erodes. Security forces remain visible, armed, and active, but visibility does not equal control. Units are redeployed constantly, chasing unrest across a widening map. Fatigue sets in. Decision-making slows, coordination frays, orders must be repeated, loyalty must be reaffirmed. The longer this continues, the harder it becomes to maintain uniform discipline across the apparatus of repression. A system designed for bursts of unrest is now facing sustained pressure. The streets reflect this change. Chants evolve from economic demands to outright rejection of authority. Symbols once protected by taboo are openly challenged. Public defiance becomes normalized. When thousands chant, it emboldens tens of thousands. When tens of thousands march, it draws hundreds of thousands. Momentum becomes its own organizing principle. At the same time, the state escalates. Mass arrests intensify, detention centers overflow, communications blackouts expand, curfews are imposed and ignored. Each escalation is meant to restore fear, but instead, it reinforces the sense that the regime is reacting rather than controlling. Reaction is not power. Reaction is admission of vulnerability. Economic life begins to seize up under the strain. Work stoppages ripple outward. Transportation disruptions stall commerce. Supply chains slow. Small businesses close. Markets grow volatile. When livelihoods are disrupted alongside political repression, grievances multiply. Economic paralysis feeds anger, and anger feeds further disruption. The system enters a self-reinforcing cycle of instability. Behind closed doors, anxiety spreads. Public statements project confidence, but internal calculations grow darker. Leaders understand that collapse rarely comes as a single event. It comes as erosion. Authority weakens at the margins first. Enforcement becomes inconsistent. Compliance becomes selective. Elites begin hedging, not defecting openly, but waiting, watching, calculating. That quiet hesitation is often the beginning of the end. The regime still possesses formidable tools. Force remains concentrated, institutions still function. The state has survived previous crises by outlasting them. But endurance requires belief. Belief among enforcers that the system is permanent. Belief among citizens that resistance is futile. Both beliefs are now under strain. When permanence is questioned, loyalty becomes conditional. The protests themselves are evolving. They are no longer purely reactive. They develop rhythm. Certain days see predictable surges. Certain locations become symbolic. People learn when and where to gather. The movement develops muscle memory. This is the difference between unrest and uprising. Unrest flares. Uprising persists. Information blackouts, once effective, now have diminishing returns. When official narratives diverge too far from lived experience, credibility collapses. People trust their neighbors more than broadcasts. Rumors spread, but so does resolve. In the absence of information, imagination fills the void, and imagination under pressure often assumes the worst. Nightfall does not bring calm, it brings uncertainty. Will security forces push harder? Will protests hold? Will something snap? Each night that crowds remain signals endurance. Each morning that demonstrations resume confirms it. Time, once an ally of the state, becomes an enemy. The longer the confrontation lasts, the more normalized defiance becomes. This is the phase where collapse becomes conceivable, not inevitable, but imaginable. And imagination is dangerous for authoritarian systems. Once people can picture a future beyond the regime, fear loses its monopoly. Even if the state survives, it cannot erase that vision. It lingers, reshaping expectations permanently. There are moments of hesitation visible even through the fog. Delays, inconsistencies, orders that take longer to execute. These are not defections, but they are signals. Systems under stress reveal their weaknesses subtly before they fail openly. Collapse, if it comes, will not announce itself. It will seep. The regime faces a narrowing set of options: escalate repression further and risk mass alienation and internal fracture, concede partially and risk emboldening the movement, wait and hope fatigue sets in. None of these options guarantee survival. Each carries risk. The luxury of safe choices is gone. The crowds understand this. Their persistence is strategic, even if uncoordinated. Simply remaining present forces the state to burn resources, credibility, and cohesion. The longer the streets stay full, the more the balance shifts away from authority. History offers no script here. Some movements collapse under pressure, others succeed unexpectedly. Outcomes hinge on timing, cohesion, and the unpredictable behavior of institutions under strain. What is certain is that the regime is no longer operating from a position of unquestioned dominance. Iran now exists in a liminal state, not stable, not collapsed, balanced on a fault line that grows wider each day. Millions have stepped into public space knowing the risks, and they have not stepped back. That alone changes everything. As night falls again, chants echo through streets that once symbolized control. The regime listens, calculates, and fears what it has always feared most. Not foreign enemies, not sanctions, not pressure from outside, but a population that has decided, together, that obedience is no longer the default. Whether this moment becomes a turning point or a tragedy remains uncertain. But one truth is already clear. The regime is no longer secure in its certainty. And once certainty is gone, collapse is no longer unthinkable. It becomes a question suspended in the air, waiting to be answered by events that are already in motion.